Hello 7-2 team. This is Mr. Jacoco again with another video lesson. This is video lesson number 15, Tuesday, May 12th. So this is video lesson 15, Tuesday, May 12th for the week of 5/11 through 5/15. Last video lesson you learned about Texan independence. You learned that Texas was an area of land that won its independence from Mexico and for a while was its own country. Eventually the country of Texas joined the United States and became the state of Texas. Today we're going to learn about how a lot of territory around Texas, such as New Mexico, Arizona, the present-day state of California, how all that land became part of the United States. Today we're going to learn about the Mexican War. So before we get into that, it's important to note that there were two territories to the west of Texas. There's the New Mexico territory and the territory of California. Even though the country of Mexico still owned California and the southwest lands that were called the New Mexico territory, many Americans were living there. Some had been living there ever since it was a Spanish colony. For several years, actually, the president of the time, President Polk, tried to buy California and New Mexico from Mexico. Now keep in mind, President Polk was a president who believed very strongly in manifest destiny. And if you remember from previous lessons, manifest destiny was the belief that the United States was to extend its borders from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. We believed, well, people that believed in manifest destiny believed it was America's right and it was inevitable. It was going to happen one way or another. We were going to get that land. Of all the presidents we ever had, President Polk was probably the strongest believer in manifest destiny. And he wanted very badly to add the lands of California and the New Mexico territory to the United States. This was a lot of land. So he tried to buy it from Mexico. He twice tried to buy it, but Mexico rejected the offer. They didn't want to sell this land. But Polk was determined to get the land one way or another. And this would lead to what we today call the Mexican War. The Mexican War was a war between the United States and Mexico. It started in 1846 and it would end in 1848, so it was a 2-year war. If you're wondering how this started, well, it was really started by President Polk. President Polk provoked Mexico to attack U.S. forces. President Polk knew that Mexico had a different idea of where the border between Mexico and Texas should be rather than what we thought the border should be. We believed the border should be at the Rio Grande River. Mexico believed it should be at the Nueces River. The Nueces River was further north than the Rio Grande River. So what ended up happening was President Polk told a general named Winfield Scott to take U.S. military forces, units of the U.S. Army, to cross the Nueces River. Polk knew that if Winfield Scott, General Scott, crossed the Nueces River, Mexico would view that as an invasion and attack. And that's precisely what happened. General Scott marched troops across the Nueces River. Mexico saw this as an attack into their territory or an invasion of their territory, so they shot at the American troops. American troops fired back, and you had a battle. People on both sides were killed. After this happened, President Polk went to Congress, and he asked them to declare war. He informed Congress that we had been attacked, that our soldiers had been shot at by Mexican soldiers, and that we needed to declare war on Mexico as a response. The American public was divided about going to war. About half the public wanted to go to war. They said, after all, we were attacked. But another half were against the war with Mexico. Much of the disagreement or the questioning about going to war with Mexico centered around whether it was justified or not. Two very famous Americans brought these points up. and we're going to learn about him in later chapters. One was Frederick Douglass, famous abolitionist, a former escaped slave who dedicated a lot of his life to free other slaves. He called going to war with Mexico disgraceful, cruel, and he believed it would do nothing but make slave states and the institution of slavery stronger in America, since all this land that we were disputing with Mexico was in the South. Another famous American was Abe Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was, at the time, an Illinois congressman, although today he's known as a president. Abe Lincoln knew that the American troops were actually in what Mexico considered their territory. So he constantly brought up the question of whether this war was even justified. Was it even legal? But in the end, newspapers, which were the biggest sources of media at the time, this is before television, before the internet, many newspapers supported the war, and they painted Mexico as aggressors. And most of the public eventually starts to agree that we should go to war with Mexico. Congress does declare war with Mexico eventually, and a war begins. President Polk's war plan is planned out into 3 phases. And these 3 phases are going to happen all at once. 3 separate American armies are going to both drive. Phase 1 would be to drive the Mexican army away from Texas. Phase 2 is to attack and control California and New Mexico. And in Phase 3, a U.S. military force would invade Mexico itself and capture the capital, Mexico City. After 2 years of fighting, the war ends. The U.S. won the war very easily. The reason why we won the war easily is because Mexico was surprised, they were unprepared, they were overwhelmed, their army was outnumbered, and quite simply, they were outgunned. We had better weapons than they did. So we win all the battles of the war except for one. It's pretty lopsided. Despite that, the U.S. does suffer losses. 1,721 U.S. soldiers are killed in the war. 11,000 died from diseases. So the total number of deaths was 12,721 for the United States. We also spent $100 million on the war, which was a tremendous amount of money for back then. That was more like $100 billion today. Mexican losses were severe. Mexico lost 25,000 soldiers killed in battle, which was double of what the U.S. had killed. Thousands of Mexican civilians were killed or wounded. But even worse for Mexico than that were the long-term consequences of the war. Mexico would end up losing half of its country to the United States, which I'll explain in just a second. Soon after the war ended, a peace treaty was signed between Mexico and the United States, officially ending the war. It was called the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and it was signed in 1848. The Treaty of Guadalupe did 3 things. Number 1, it made Mexico give up all claims to Texas forever. Never again would Mexico say Texas should be their land. Number 2, the Rio Grande River would become the border of the United States and Mexico. This also made the state of Texas a bigger state. Number 3, Mexico would give up the California Territory, the New Mexico Territory, and out of these territories there would be 6 future states. The states of California, New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, Nevada, and Arizona. In essence, almost 25% of the current USA is added after this war. Several years later, there would be one more addition of land. This one would be a purchase. This was called the Gadsden Purchase in 1853. In 1853, the U.S. government purchased more land on the southern edge of Arizona and New Mexico for $10 million from Mexico. Now, this wasn't a whole lot of land, but to add insult to injury, years after this purchase, an enormous deposit of silver would be discovered on the land that Mexico sold to us. Mexico sold us the land for $10 million, But once we discovered all that silver on the land, which was called the Comstock Lode, that silver was worth $2.3 billion in today's money. So again, Mexico loses big. They sell us land that had a lot of silver on it for very little money. So to sum up this section, the United States gets bigger one last time through war, the Mexican War. Many future states are added, 6, which I described earlier. Mexico is torn in half. They're a huge loser in that they lose half their country and they never quite fully recover from this. And if you look at a map of the United States today, and if you look at the states of California, New Mexico, and Arizona, and Nevada, and even Texas, which was added before all this, you'll see that a lot of places on the map have Spanish names, such as San Francisco, Los Angeles, El Paso, San Antonio. These are Spanish names because, of course, this was territory, land controlled by Mexico, and before it was controlled by Mexico, it was a colony of Spain. So that's what you're going to learn about in, I shouldn't say learn about, that's what you're going to review when you look over your book section and answer the few questions related to this tonight, or today, or whenever you do this assignment. And make sure that you stay connected. Make sure you get this done in a timely fashion. It's Tuesday, so try to get this done by Thursday. And Thursday, there'll be another short assignment. That'll be due the following week. So once again, I want to commend everybody doing these assignments. Great, great job. More and more people are connected than ever before. Some people are still perfect. They haven't missed a single assignment. So congratulations. Keep up the good work. Stay connected. And of course, stay healthy and be well. Talk to you next time. Bye.